10 female veteran was kicked out of the horse auction until she placed the most shocking bid. 10 female veteran was kicked out of the horse auction until she one of the most prestigious horse auctions in the American West, where a single nod could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. A woman stepped through the doors in silence. No one knew who she was. No one cared to ask. At one of the most prestigious horse auctions in the America, one glance at her faded military jacket, worn-out boots, and neatly tied-back hair was enough for the entire room to decide she didn't belong. But as the bidding reached its most intense moment, and all eyes turned toward a fierce black stallion named Shadowfax, the woman raised her hand. A number was spoken. One glance at her faded military jacket, worn-out boots, and the room froze. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The grand foyer of Liberty Ridge Equestrian Center sparkled under the glow of a sprawling crystal chandelier. The room froze. Before we begin, let us know where you're watched from each teardrop of crystal. Glimmers of warm light rained down on a floor polished to a near mirror sheen. Rows of expensive leather chairs fanned out beneath the chandelier, arranged in a careful arc around an elevated wooden podium where the auctioneer would soon preside. Every inch of the place spoke of prestige and exclusivity, an emporium of equine wealth set against the arid backdrop of Arizona's desert outskirts. From each teardrop of crystal, glimmers of warm light rained as the doors swung open for the evening's event. A soft hum of conversation began to fill the hall. Men in tailored Italian suits, cowboy hats fashioned from the finest felt, and polished snakeskin boots took their seats with quiet confidence. Some brandished silver belt buckles glinting under the chandelier's rays. As the doors swung open for the evening's event, a soft hum of others discreetly swirled glasses of top-shelf whiskey or swirling red wine, studying thick catalogs listing the horses up for sale tonight. There was an air of focused anticipation. Everyone here was hunting for some. Others discreetly swirled glasses of top-shelf whiskey or swoop, a champion bloodline, a future race winner, or an uncut gem in the form of a restless stallion. A hush fell whenever someone of clear importance strolled through. These VIP guests had embroidered name tags on their reserved seats, and personal servers standing by with wine flutes at the ready. A champion bloodline, a future race winner, or an uncut gem whispered greetings. "So good to see you," or "I heard you made a killing at the last sale," intermingled with the clinking of glassware. Yet for all the courtesy, an undercurrent of tension rippled beneath the polished smile. This was more than a social gathering. It was a battlefield of status where each discreet nod during the bidding could represent hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes more. Whispered greetings, "So good to see you," or "I heard you mad." Amid the swirl of opulence, one name passed from lip to lip: Shadowfax. A black stallion with an ancestry rumored to include 3 national champions. Shadowfax was the star of the eve. Amid the swirl of opulence, one name passed from lip to lip. Everyone expected his lot to close the show. Speculations on his potential final price had circulated in hushed tones over the previous weeks. Some believed it could soar past $250,000, and the bravest murmured it might venture beyond $500,000. Everyone expected his lot to close the show. Speculations on no horse garnered half the excitement. Shadowfax. At precisely 8 o'clock, the overhead lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the official start of the auction was near. A man in a pristine suit, Harold Whitman, the night's auctioneer, approached the wooden podium. No horse garnered half the excitement. Shadowfax. At Presola, with an experienced gaze, he surveyed the seated crowd. In that moment, an unspoken tension settled, not of fear but of readiness. Every buyer had come armed with deep pockets and grand ambitions. With an experienced gaze, he surveyed the seated crowd. In that, a subtle disturbance happened at the entrance. A woman walked in. She had no entourage, no silver belt buckle, no glossy boots or embroidered jacket. Then, a subtle disturbance happened at the entrance. A woman, she wore an old military-style coat. The fabric frayed around the cuffs, and her worn jeans were tucked into scuffed-up boots that looked like they had traveled thousands of dusty miles. Her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, leaving her face exposed, quietly focused, unsmiling and seemingly unaffected by the grand display around her. The silence around her was palpable. She wore an old military-style coat, the fabric frayed around, heads turned, eyes narrowed, and for a moment you could almost feel the collective question, who on earth is that? This was, after all, a sanctuary for the wealthy, the elite breeders, and the well-heeled investor. Outsiders did not simply stroll in, especially not dressed like they had come from a roadside diner. Whispers fired through the crowd. Is she lost? Maybe she's staff. She doesn't belong here. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and for a moment you could almost... The woman, however, didn't flinch. She paused only briefly to scan the room as though checking its layout, before making her way forward with a steady step. Her posture revealed more discipline than arrogance, a quiet self-control reminiscent of someone used to following her own code. The woman, however, didn't flinch. She paused only briefly. The crowd parted for her, albeit reluctantly, some with condescending smirks. There was no immediate confrontation. Rather, a swirl of low laughter and dismissive commentary trailed in her wake. This stark contrast between the grandeur of the setting and the unassuming figure in a battered military jacket began to shape the narrative of the evening. The crowd parted for her, albeit reluctantly, some with condor. You could see it in the eyes of onlookers. They were measuring her worth by her attire, her worn boots, and the lack of any obvious wealth. She neither cowered nor reacted, and in that unwavering calm the seeds of conflict were sown. You could see it in the eyes of onlookers. They scorned her quietly, certain she was an interloper. Those who had spent fortunes on polished looks and impeccable reputations found themselves unsettled, in a place where social strata were defined by net worth and bloodline connections. This woman's mere presence felt like a breach of protocol. Velvet ropes and discreet signs indicated restricted areas, stables for the auctioned horses, a small lounge for VIP refreshments, and staff-only hallways. But the tension in the air hinted that the night would be fun. The woman Samantha Cole moved through the corridor like a phantom, ignoring the pointed looks from passing attendees. Conversations trailed off whenever she passed, replaced by pointed stares and muffled snickers. No sign of hesitation colored her gaze. The woman Samantha Cole moved through the corridor like a fox. She walked as though she had a very specific destination in mind, as though the swirl of affluent buyers and their companions barely existed. A cowboy-hatted couple laughed in a hush as she passed. A smirking group in expensive suits offered mocking nods, but nothing altered her course. Step by step she headed toward the most remote stalls, an area labeled for high-value or high-spirited horse. She walked as though she had a very specific destination in. The sign behind him read authorized personnel and registered bidders only. It was lit by warm overhead bulbs that cast long shadows across. He made a half-step forward, presumably to check her badge or direct her away. Yet something in her unwavering stride gave him pause. Without a word, she slipped past, heading straight for the last stall. Inside that stall stood the horse everyone had been whispering about. He made a half-step forward, presumably to check her badge or Shadowfax. Even from several yards away, the stallion's presence was undeniable. His coat glistened like black satin under the stable lights, accentuating the power in his arched neck and the taut lines of his flank. Shadowfax. Even from several yards away, the stallion's presence. A thick mane tumbled across his crest, slightly tangled, giving him the look of a defiant warrior. A few staff members kept their distance, whispering about how he'd refused to let a single trainer near him without a fight. Riley stopped just short of the wooden half-door and let her gaze rest fully on Shadowfax. A thick mane tumbled across his crest, slightly tangled. Unlike the others, she didn't consult a catalog or check a phone. She merely looked. A minute passed, maybe more, in utter silence. Shadowfax noticed her flicking his ears forward. Unlike the others, she didn't consult a catalog or check a file. His eyes were dark and keen, reflecting a challenge and yet a curiosity. A stable hand across the aisle upon seeing Riley shook her head and leaned closer to a colleague. That horse nearly kicked Travis yesterday. He's downright vicious when spooked. She shouldn't stand there. His eyes were dark and keen, reflecting a challenge and yet, but the stable hand's warning remained unspoken to Riley. They were too puzzled by who this stranger might be and why she dared approach a horse known for its volatility. Riley's expression was calm. Gently, she lifted a hand and rested it along the edge of the half-door, letting her fingertips touch the wood. The stallion huffed, ears twitching, but he did not shy away. But the stable hand's warning remained unspoken to Riley. For a few heartbeats, it seemed as if they were engaged in a silent exchange. The overhead light illuminated half of Riley's face, revealing lines of fatigue near her eyes, lines that hinted at experiences far beyond horse auction. Her gaze unwavering met Shadowfax's. For a few heartbeats, it seemed as if they were engaged in They shared a slow moment of breath, an unspoken understanding. If a stranger had watched them without context, they might think the horse and the woman had known each other for years. Shadowfax's posture softened, just slightly, his ears rotating forward as though listening intently. They shared a slow moment of breath, an unspoken understanding. No kicking at the stall door, no vicious snort. In that stillness, Riley's hand pressed gently against the rough wood, almost as if she were absorbing the horse's tension, or letting him sense something familiar in her. At that precise moment, a presence made itself known behind Riley. No kicking at the stall door, no vicious snort. In that still, a tall, uniformed man, with broad shoulders and a purposeful stance, stepped into view. His name tag read, Officer R. Davis. The shine of his polished badge and the crisp lines of his uniform signaled he was security personnel, tasked with controlling access to restricted area. A tall, uniformed man, with broad shoulders and a purposeful, "Ma'am," he said in a low but firm voice. "This section is reserved for bidders who've registered and staff who handle the horses. I'm afraid I need to see your pass. If you don't have one, I must ask you to leave." Riley's head turned slowly. She regarded the officer with a cool, polite gaze. "Ma'am," he said in a low but firm voice, "this section is Davis kept his stance, arms by his sides but posture rigid. "I was just admiring the stallion," she answered, voice calm. "Understood, but only authorized buyers or staff are allowed here. If you're just looking around, I'm sorry, but I need you to go back to the main hall." A brief flicker of disappointment crossed Riley's face, but she gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement. "Understood, but only authorized buyers or staff are allowed." "Of course," she replied softly. Yet for a moment longer, her gaze lingered on Shadowfax as though unwilling to sever that tenuous link. The stallion's breathing, slow and deep, felt in sync with her own. Then, with no further protest, Riley stepped aside. "Of course," she replied softly. Yet for a moment longer, her gazing, she gave one last glance to the horse, eyes conveying a silent promise. "I'll return." Davis looked somewhat relieved that she didn't cause a scene. He nodded in professional courtesy and gestured for her to follow him back toward the corridor. Shadowfax, left behind the half door, let out a snort that echoed in the stable. His ears flicked, searching for the presence that had just departed. She gave one last glance to the horse, eyes conveying a silence. A stable hand tried to approach to check on him, but the stallion tossed his head, stamping a hoof as though to ward away any attempt to get The brief moment of calm had ended, replaced by the tension that usually clung to Shadowfax. Riley, meanwhile, walked away with measured steps, escorted by Officer Mason. A stable hand tried to approach to check on him, but the stallion, she said nothing more, only allowed herself to be guided back to the ropes that marked the boundary for non-registered guests. In the hush that followed, a trickle of watchers on the periphery started to giggle or raise their brows in amused speculation. They had witnessed her approach the fearsome Shadowfax with startling confidence. Yet in their eyes, she had been summarily rebuffed by security. She said nothing more, only allowed herself to be guided back. "Nothing to see here, folks. Another fish out of water, right?" But something in Riley's expression suggested otherwise. Though outwardly she complied, her mind remained locked on the stallion. A quiet resolve settled across her features, as if she now had an unspoken goal. "Nothing to see here, folks. Another fish out of water, right?" She might have been turned back from the stable, but she was not done. Re-entering the main corridor, Officer Mason remained at Riley's side for a few more steps, ensuring she headed back toward the public area of the auction. Once certain she wouldn't attempt another detour, he peeled away to resume his post, leaving her alone in a bustling corridor of well-dressed bidders. She might have been turned back from the stable, but she was, except now her presence seemed to provoke a louder reaction than before. A cluster of 4 or 5 individuals stood near a set of plush chairs, obviously taking a break from the main hall. Their conversation halted mid-sentence. the moment they noticed the uniformed officer walking away from Riley. Except now her presence seemed to provoke a louder reaction. One of the women, draped in an extravagant shawl and carrying a glass of champagne, gave a mocking little laugh. "Look at that," she said brightly, not bothering to lower her voice. "Apparently we have a trespasser in the stable." One of the women, draped in an extravagant shawl and carrying... Did she think she was here to buy a saddle for a war horse? Her friend, a tall man in a Stetson hat that gleamed with silver conchos, smirked. Maybe she got lost on the way to the Veterans Affairs office. A few steps down the corridor, a well-coiffed couple who had overheard the remarks passed, knowing smiles back and forth. Did she think she was here to buy a saddle for a war horse? One of them leaned in to whisper loud enough for Riley to catch. "We do attract all types, don't we? Even the ones who can't possibly afford more than a barrel horse at a discount rodeo." Riley continued forward without breaking stride, ignoring the half-veiled One of them leaned in to whisper loud enough for Riley to catch. Her stoic silence and apparent lack of offense seemed to mystify them. In an environment where flashy words and flamboyant displays were the norm, she offered no reaction. This in turn emboldened a few onlookers to be more direct, certain they would not face any comeback from her. Her stoic silence and apparent lack of offense seemed to mime. Near the entrance to the main auction hall, a short man sporting an impeccably pressed suit and a turquoise bolo tie raised his voice. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right building? The volunteer sign-up is back in town." Laughter erupted from two others at his side. Near the entrance to the main auction hall, a short man spar Riley paused briefly, as if to weigh whether to respond. Then she simply resumed her pace. The laughter lost a bit of its force when she neither stammered nor tried to defend herself. Riley paused briefly, as if to weigh whether to respond. Then at that exact instant, a new player stepped into the picture. Blake Mercer, an imposing figure in a crisp denim shirt embroidered with stylized motifs across the shoulders, a shining silver belt buckle, and a pristine white cowboy hat, walked into the corridor from the side lounge. He commanded immediate attention not just for his attire, but for the aura of money and reputation trailing him. At that exact instant, a new player stepped into the picture. The hush that followed was telling. People parted to give him space, eager to greet him with nods of recognition. Drake's gaze landed on Riley almost immediately. His lips curved into a smirk as though he had found the evening's prime source of amusement. The hush that followed was telling. People parted to give him "Well, would you look at that?" he said to no one in particular, though his voice carried through the corridor. "Did we open the doors for charity tonight? Or is this a new policy to invite spectators from the local base?" Some polite chuckles rippled through the onlookers. Riley, now just a few steps away, halted. "Well, would you look at that?" he said to no one in particular. She faced Drake but said nothing, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The corridor grew quiet in anticipation of a reply, but none came. Instead, she simply watched him with cool detachment. She faced Drake but said nothing, her posture straight. Drake took a slow step forward, tilting his head in an exaggerated show of curiosity. "Let me guess, ma'am," he drawled, his tone mocking. "You thought you could waltz in here and get a free show? See what real horse flesh looks like." He raised a hand in a theatrical gesture toward the double doors leading into the main auditorium. Drake took a slow step forward, tilting his head in an "But I'm afraid we're quite select. Perhaps you'd be more at home cleaning stalls. We do have a few openings for a stable hand, if you're that determined to see the horses up close. But I'm afraid we're quite selective. Perhaps you'd be more..." A low rumble of laughter followed, some open, some half-stifled. The watchers seemed ready for a biting retort, a flustered defense, any sign that the woman would crumble under Drake's derision. Yet Riley remained silent. She barely blinked, her gaze distant, as though she considered Drake no more than background noise. A low rumble of laughter followed, some open, some half-stifled. The effect was unsettling. Drake's smirk slipped a fraction, and the crowd's laughter faltered in confusion. They had expected a display of anger or embarrassment, some reaction to stoke further ridicule. The effect was unsettling. Drake's smirk slipped a fraction. Instead, she offered them calm disregard. A middle-aged lady in pearls, perhaps unsettled by the tension, tried to lighten the mood. "Oh, come on," she teased. "We all know not everyone can handle such an event." Instead, she offered them calm disregard. A middle-aged lady. Maybe she just wanted a little look at Shadowfax before he sold. Drake jumped on that hook. Indeed, good luck to her if she plans on bidding. He scoffed. Maybe she just wanted a little look at Shadowfax before he sold. We'll see if she can even raise her paddle. This innuendo about money was a known staple in the auction scene. One implied that the target didn't have the means to compete. Riley cast a glance at the doors to the auditorium. Faint voices emanating from inside. We'll see if she can even raise her paddle. This innuendo aback. The next horse in line was likely already being introduced. She exhaled softly, not out of resignation, but of measured patience, before turning her attention briefly to Drake. As though summing him up, without a word, she pivoted and continued toward the auditorium's entrance. The next horse in line was likely already being introduced. "Where do you think you're going, soldier?" Drake fired after her. "You're just going to stand at the back, or do you actually have a number card with you?" Riley's steps didn't falter. She pushed the door open, letting the sudden wave of cool, air-conditioned atmosphere wash over her. "Where do you think you're going, soldier?" Drake fired after. Drake looked momentarily robbed of his momentum, and the little knot of onlookers near him seemed divided. Some wore grins of expectation. Others had begun to suspect something deeper about the woman's composure. In the hush that ensued, more than a few watchers found themselves unconsciously rooting for this silent figure. Drake looked momentarily robbed of his momentum, and there was a dignity to her refusal to engage in their petty insults. A sense of quiet strength that defied their elaborate, status-driven world. Many might still have written her off as an imposter or a curiosity, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Who is she really? The unspoken question hung in the corridor, lingering long after Riley had passed through the doors, disappearing into the throng of high rollers inside. There was a dignity to her refusal to engage in their petty. A ring attendant tried to circle her for the audience's inspection, while Harold Whitman rattled off details in the rhythmic cadence of an experienced auctioneer. Back inside the main auditorium, the low hum of the auction bidding paddles rose and fell in careful increments. Riley slipped in near the back, unobtrusive, crossing her arms as she stood behind a half-row of empty chairs reserved for late VIP arrivals. She drew no immediate attention. After all, the excitement was up front, where the thoroughbred mare was inching toward a final sale. Bidding paddles rose and fell in careful increment. Riley selected. The chatter in that rear section was subdued. Within minutes, the mare sold for a respectable sum. Polite applause scattered through the hall, and the ring attendants led her away. The chatter in that rear section was subdued. Within minutes, Pierce cleared his throat, preparing to announce a short interlude before the next horse. Yet in that moment, a whisper of movement caught Riley's attention. To her right, stepping quietly into the aisle, was Officer Mason. He didn't look aggressive, but he eyed her with a sense of duty. Pierce cleared his throat, preparing to announce a short
"I've asked you once already," he said in a low voice, leaning toward her so as not to disrupt the formal atmosphere. "If you're not a registered bidder, you shouldn't be in this section, ma'am." Riley turned slightly to face him. She noticed the lines of tension around his eyes. He didn't want a confrontation, but rules were rules. "I've asked you once already," he said in a low voice, leaning up. She offered no apology. Instead, she calmly replied, "I understand that, but I won't be leaving just yet." Then she paused, letting the quiet weight of her words build. She offered no apology. Instead, she calmly replied, I'm here for the next horse." Davis hesitated, uncertain how to interpret her statement. "Look, if you have a bidding card, please show it. If not." It was then that Blake Mercer emerged from a side row, accompanied by two associates. "I'm here for the next horse." Davis hesitated, uncertain how to. He spotted Riley and the security officer and wasted no time injecting himself into the conversation. "Ah, she's still here," he drawled. "Officer, do your job." He spotted Riley and the security officer and wasted no time. "She doesn't belong in these seats." Riley's gaze flicked from Davis to Drake, then back to the officer. The surrounding audience members, catching the tension, began to quiet down, leaning closer to see how the altercation might unfold. "She doesn't belong in these seats." Riley's gaze flicked from. For a brief second, Davis looked like he was about to physically escort Riley out, if only to placate Drake. The entire back row's attention was now locked on them. At last, Riley took in a measured breath. For a brief second, Davis looked like he was about to fizzy. She turned fully to Davis, but her words were directed not just at him, but at the half dozen or so onlookers who had grown silent in curiosity. Her tone was even, unwavering. "I didn't come here just to watch," she said. She turned fully to Davis, but her words were directed not. Her voice, though not loud, carried a quiet resonance that reached further than one might expect. "I came here to buy." It was as though a bolt of electricity zapped through the seat. Her voice, though not loud, carried a quiet resonance that Blake Mercer froze, eyebrows shooting upward in an incredulous arch. The circle of watchers around them blinked in stunned surprise. Officer Mason's mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no words came. Blake Mercer froze, eyebrows shooting upward in an incredulous. The hush spread like ripples on a pond. Even those a few rows away who only caught fragments of the exchange grew attentive. "She's here to buy," someone repeated under their breath, disbelieving. The hush spread like ripples on a pond. Even those a few rows, another leaned over to a companion whispering, "Who is she anyway?" From his vantage point at the front, Harold Whitman glanced toward the commotion. His usual composure faltered, aware a scene might be brewing. However, he recognized that the next horse, a crucial highlight of the auction, would soon be announced, and the eyes of every wealthy patron were needed on the ring. Another leaned over to a companion whispering, "Who is she Anna?" He tapped his gavel lightly, hoping to refocus the crowd, but the back section remained fixated on Riley. In the swirl of muted whispers, Riley merely stood there, arms at her side. Her shoulders relaxed, yet there was an edge of defiance to her posture. He tapped his gavel lightly, hoping to refocus the crowd. But it was not arrogance. It was the bearing of someone who had faced bigger threats than a room full of disbelieving gazes. She offered no further explanation. She didn't brag about her financial capacity, nor brandish any proof. It was not arrogance. It was the bearing of someone who... Drake recovered first, letting out a soft scoff to buy. He repeated mockingly, "Sure you did." Her quiet statement, "I came here to buy," resonated with all. He stepped back, gesturing sarcastically. "Then by all means enjoy the show. We'll see how far that bravado goes when the bidding starts." Officer Mason's stance shifted. He was no longer sure if forcibly removing her would cause a bigger scene. On one hand, Drake was a major figure in the horse community. On the other, the auction's management wouldn't want trouble if Riley could indeed present valid credentials. He stepped back, gesturing sarcastically. "Then by all means," with a reluctant nod, Davis mumbled, "All right, ma'am, we'll let you stay. For now." Then he drifted sideways, positioning himself where he could watch her, but also remain out of the direct spotlight. A wave of murmurs pulsed through the seats. Some watchers smirked, convinced this was little more than a comedic interlude. Others felt a small thrill. Nothing livens a high-stakes auction like an unexpected wild card. With a reluctant nod, Davis mumbled, "All right, ma'am, we'll let..." The question was, could she truly buy a horse here? Especially one rumored to reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. Riley pivoted slowly, scanning for an empty seat that might offer a decent view of the stage. Finding none near the back, she chose to remain standing against the wall. She was determined to see what came next, her mind already fixated on Shadow. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She knew the entire auditorium was about to learn that her single sentence was no empty bluff. And with that, the stage was set. The question was, could she truly buy a horse here? Especially, the watchers who had laughed no longer felt so confident in their mockery, and the seeds of curiosity sprouted in the quiet corners of the hall. Because in an arena built on the premise that money speaks the loudest, a woman in a faded military jacket was about to speak a language they all understood, only they never expected it to come from her. A palpable air of tension had settled over the auction hall after Samantha Cole's soft-spoken declaration, "I came here to buy." Though the rest of the evening's program continued on schedule, many in the audience found their attention drifting toward the back of the room, where the mysterious woman stood. The watchers who had laughed no longer felt so confident in the ring assistants brought in several horses one at a time, each with its own set of credentials and lineage, but the bids never soared too high. It was as if the crowd was collectively saving its energy and its money for the last. Harold Whitman, the ever-composed auctioneer, waited until the second-to-last horse of the night was sold. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, letting his tone drop into a resonant pitch that commanded attention, "we've come at last to the final horse of our event. A horse that needs little introduction, yet one whose reputation alone has stirred more debate than any other on tonight's list. The ring assistants brought in several horses one at a time. A wave of excited murmurs rolled through the seats. People sat a bit straighter, flipping open the catalogs they had skimmed so many times already. The cover featured a stylized silhouette of Shadowfax. Pierce continued as the descendant of 3 national champions. His lineage speaks of speed, stamina, and an unbreakable will. Over the past months, rumor and hearsay have surrounded this horse. Some call him too wild. Others proclaim him a potential legend in the making. It's time to find out who among us is prepared to harness that potential. The crowd shifted in their seats, a collective breath held in anticipation. Even those who had told themselves they would only watch found their pulses quickening. A wave of excited murmurs rolled through the seats. People saw. In the back of the hall, Samantha Cole stood with her arms gently folded. She felt her heartbeat tick up a notch at the sound of Shadowfax's name, but her face remained impassive, betraying no hint of the storm brewing in her thought. From a side entrance, 2 ring attendants led Shadowfax into the open space. The stallion entered with a hush gripped the audience. Even those who had heard rumors that Shadowfax was difficult to manage were unprepared for the sheer presence he exuded. The ring assistant tried to circle the horse slowly so that all sides could be viewed, but Shadowfax tossed his head, stamping a hoof hard against the floor, producing a sharp clack that reverberated through the hush. In the back of the hall, Samantha Cole stood with her arms.
1 or 2 onlookers sucked in a breath. This was no docile show pony. This was an untamed force. Harold Whitman let the tension build for a few moments. He understood the art of auctioneering wasn't just about rattling off numbers, but also about reading the crowd's emotional state. His gaze flicked discreetly toward where Riley stood. Though she stood half-shadowed behind a row of seats, Pierce noted the unwavering line of her posture. Then he spoke again. His voice lowered almost to a hush, forcing everyone to strain to hear him. Bidding for Shadowfax will begin its hour beyond. Who would like to open? A faint rustle of movement passed over the audience. At first, no one raised a hand, possibly expecting some high roller to jump in or waiting to see if the starting price would drop. But with a confident flick of the wrist, a man near the front signaled. His tone displayed the practiced swagger of an experienced buyer. Pierce nodded, acknowledging the opening bid. "We have $60,000, the auctioneer announced clearly. "Do I hear $80,000? Almost before he finished speaking, a voice chimed from the side row. The new bidder was a woman in a tailored blazer, her hair pinned in a sleek twist at the nape of her neck. She held her paddle aloft, challenging any further doubt. A quick round of murmurs cascaded through the seats. $85,000. Pierce echoed, scanning for the next competitor. Can we say? A swirl of paddles began to lift in rapid succession. $100,000. Then $120,000. Applause scattered lightly around the room as if some watchers were relieved to see healthy interest. From the front row, a middle-aged man with a firm jawline and an air of quiet confidence fired back with another volleyed $150,000. The ping-pong of offers made the atmosphere crackle with excitement. Riley observed each increment without so much as a flinch, though her eyes never left Shadowfax. It was clear she was measuring the competition, gauging how far they might go and whether they had the right. She still hasn't raised her hand, probably just wants to see Shadowfax in action. At $150,000, a few participants began showing signs of hesitation. You could see it in the slight droop of their paddles in the silent consultations they had with their associates. The breeding costs, training fees, and potential risks all weighed heavily on any purchase. Shadowfax's rumored volatility amplified that sense of caution. A voice from somewhere in the side seats tried for $160,000, but the silence that followed made it clear that, aside from a handful of determined individuals, the crowd sensed the end of the climb was near. Pierce, sensing the momentum, delivered a rhythmic patter of updates. $100,000, he paused, going once at $160,000. Going. Suddenly, a crisp voice from the center row, $155,000. A small chorus of gasps rippled around them, followed by a nervous laugh from someone who had $75,000. This is an excellent line. Ladies and gentlemen, let's keep it going. And so the chain continued. $180,000. Then a terse silence as everyone recalibrated. Pierce scanned the corners for further interest. The tension in the hall almost vibrated.
It was the moment in a bidding war, where either an unexpected competitor emerged, or the final two would slug it out in $1,000 increments. Riley remained near the back, her expression a mask. She spotted Blake Mercer off to one side, leaning forward in his seat, arms resting on his knees. A thin, predatory grin curled his lips each time the price bumped higher. Drake had yet to bid, apparently content to let the smaller fish battle before wading in himself. An older gentleman behind Riley, perhaps emboldened by her calm, decided to remark, "So you're not going, we're at $175,000. Pierce announced, leaning into the microphone. "Come now, ladies and gentlemen. Shadowfax's potential alone is worth the investment. $180,000 came from Drake's lips, quick and decisive. People jolted upright. There was a general expectation that Drake, with his resources, would be a major contender. The previous bidder tried again with $190,000. But it was half-hearted. The number rattled around, floundering in a sea of second guesses. Finally, the silver-haired man who had jumped from the center row earlier pinned his paddle to his thigh, acknowledging that he was bowing out. The lull settled on the room. The lady from Mr. Drake. Pierce confirmed, going once accidento. From the opposite side of the auditorium, a slender man in a neatly tailored suit raised his paddle. $200,000. The room collectively inhaled. We have $200,000. Shadowfax at $200,000. Do we see $220,000? Are we done? Drake's jaw worked silently, though he didn't fire back another bid. A hush enveloped the crowd. $200,000. For an unpredictable stallion. Some watchers fiddled with their cuffs or tapped their pens. Others exchanged quick glances with partners, making sure they were truly out of the running. Shadowfax, that gleaming mass of muscle and restless energy, tossed his head in a way that spear-sided Drake, who gave no immediate sign of raising his bid above $200,000. The Chinese businessman, for his part, sat calmly confident that he might have the highest offer. Small pockets of applause sprang up in the corners, subdued but congratulatory. In many attendees' minds, that might just be the finishing blow. $200,000 is already a steep sum for a horse with a thorny reputation. $200,000 going once. Pierce started, letting his voice linger, going twice. At that precise beat, a figure in the back stood for a moment. The gesture was so minimal that no one noticed except Pierce, who sensed a shift in the periphery of his vision. He paused with the gavel half lifted. The crowd's collective attention pivoted toward the back. There stood Samantha Cole, her posture as calm as ever, eyes still on Shadowfax. Without fanfare, her voice cut through the hush. $600,000. A flash of confusion, then shock, rippled through the auditorium. People craned their necks, certain they must have misheard. Could she have meant $600? Pierce lowered the gavel, the wood never striking the block. His expression was one of disbelief, laced with professional curiosity. He repeated carefully. Riley's chin lifted in a nearly imperceptible nod. Yes, her eyes confirmed. The stall attendants gawked. One had to quickly shift his grip on Shadowfax's lead rope, as the horse jerked sideways, spooked by the sudden change in the crowd's mood. A flurry of exclamations buzzed around the seats. A hush fell so profound, one could hear the whir of the air conditioning. Then chaos, murmurs, gas-sharp intakes of breath. People peered at each other, at Riley, and at the stunned expression on Pierce's face. The Chinese businessman, who had believed he was about to secure Shadowfax, set his notepad down in resignation. It wasn't just a casual raise to this was triple the last figure, an unprecedented leap that outclassed nearly every sale that night, and possibly many sales that year. Pierce cleared his throat, striving to maintain composure. I need to confirm that $600,000. Ladies and gentlemen, have we just heard our new high bid? Gasps flickered like static electricity. A ring clerk stationed near the front for record keeping nearly dropped his pen. He looked over to another clerk, who merely stared back in equal disbelief from where she stood. Riley neither moved nor spoke. She simply watched the auctioneer as if waiting for him to continue. All around, people shook their heads, unsure whether to be impressed or suspicious. One woman in the second row, wearing a pearl necklace and an immaculate evening gown, leaned close to her husband. Who is she? The wife whispered. She looks like she walked off a ranch, yet she's throwing numbers bigger than Drake's usual bid. Up near the front, the Chinese businessman exhaled, placing a palm on his own thigh in a gesture of surrender. It was a silent statement. I'm out. He had budgeted for up to 220, maybe 250, but 600. That was well beyond what he'd prepared to gamble on. An untested stallion with a wild Blake Mercer said nothing at first. His posture spoke volumes, though. The casual sprawl of his shoulders disappeared, replaced by a rigid set. His hands, once relaxed over the arms of his chair, now gripped the edges. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He had strutted into the evening confident that the crowd would yield the top prize to him if he truly wanted it. But 600,000 arrived like a thunderbolt, a spectacle in itself. And it came from that woman, the one he had mocked, the one security had tried to remove. A middle-aged man sitting 2 rows behind Drake breathed. She just took the whole table, the whole damned game. Another voice, softer and nearly reverent. Maybe she's some secret heiress. Or was that a slip of the tongue? Eyes darted between Colton, the Chinese businessman, and the silent figure in the back. In a single stroke, Riley's bid had transformed the atmosphere from a polite competition into something akin to stunned disbelief. People in the VIP lounge area peered through the glass partitions, drawn by the sudden hush. Auction staff at the edges of the ring exchanged puzzled looks. Pierce carefully scanned for any new bids, his gaze flicking from Drake to the man from China. No one moved. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, collectively waiting to see. Seconds ticked by, each one weighted with possibility. When it became evident that no one intended to outbid 600,000, Pierce adjusted the gavel in his grip. He cleared his throat, meeting the eyes of the ring clerk, who nodded, signaling that the sudden jump was legitimately recorded. 600,000, Pierce stated again, more firmly this time. He surveyed the front rows, going once, going twice. He paused, giving a last chance for any soul daring enough to top that figure. The silent refusal from the entire auditorium was deafening. Just as Pierce lifted the gavel for the 3rd strike, Blake Mercer shot to his feet. His chair scraped weight. He barked, "We can't let that stand without proof. Does anyone know if she can actually back that offer up?" A ripple of nervous laughter fluttered in the vicinity of Drake's seat. Some individuals, clearly unsettled by the staggering sum, took his side. "He's right," one person murmured. 600 grand from a stranger. That's not typical. The room flickered with tension once more. Where moments ago the audience had been dazzled by the possibility of a record sale, now the spotlight turned suspiciously back to Riley. She remained by the wall, unaffected on the surface, her posture unchanged, eyes unwavering. A faintly sarcastic smirk twisted Drake's lip. "I think it's possible we're witnessing a bluff," he continued, turning his head to address the crowd. "After all, if a lady wanted attention, she might just throw a number out there, hoping to, I don't know, disrupt the entire night." A few chuckles broke out, short and brittle. The deeper truth was that everyone disliked the idea of a fake bidder scuttling the final lot, especially one so prestigious. Yet the nature of auctions demanded that if any doubt existed, it must be dispelled. Harold Whitman adjusted the microphone to address Drake's outburst. "Mr. Drake," he said in a carefully level voice. He shifted his gaze across the rows of seats until it landed on Riley. "Ms. Shaw, would you mind stepping forward, or otherwise confirming you have the means to complete this purchase? This is not personal. We simply need to ensure the auction's integrity." No overt malice colored Pierce's tone. He was simply doing his job. The hush returned, punctuated only by Shadowfax's restless stomping in the ring. Security staff, including Officer R. Davis, gravitated toward the front, prepared to intervene if any disturbance occurred. Riley pushed away from the wall, taking unhurried steps down the aisle. Her expression was measured, calm. She stopped a few feet away from the ring where Pierce and the ring clerk awaited her. Drake, from his vantage point, crossed his arms, projecting skepticism. A murmur of watchers commented on her every move, her worn boots, the battered coat, her steady composure. "Let's see if she's the real deal," one voice hissed. In a single smooth motion, Riley reached inside her jacket, and almost tangible tension swelled. Some watchers half expected her to produce an empty wallet or some slip of scribbled IOU, but instead she withdrew a neatly folded piece of paper. She extended it toward Pierce, who took it gingerly. Careful not to tear the document, Pierce unfolded it. His eyes scanned the official bank stamps, the watermark, then the sum. $600,000. The corners of his mouth twitched with what might have been awe or relief. He turned, showing it briefly to the ring clerk. The clerk's face registered a spectrum of emotions: confusion, shock, then acceptance. Well, Pierce spoke into the microphone. It appears Ms. Shaw has provided a legitimate cashier's check from First Arizona Bank in the amount of $600,000. The check is made out specifically for the purchase of Shadowfax at tonight's auction. A ripple of disbelief followed by stunned acceptance spread across the rows. Some people leaned to whisper to neighbors, others merely gaped, jaws slack. Even Blake Mercer's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed at the official stamp, frustration flaring in his features. Officer Mason, standing a few paces away, let out a breath he'd been holding. He recalled having tried to eject this woman not long ago, and now she stood vindicated before everyone. A man in a sharp vest and tie muttered, "Who is she?" echoing the refrain that had been repeated all evening. A wave of recollection flickered over certain corners of the hall. Some realized they had heard of a Samantha Cole, rumored to have deep pockets, or a storied military background. But details were vague. Drake clenched his jaw, arms still folded. The entire scenario looked to be slipping out of his control. That sense of calm triumph emanating from Riley undercut all his earlier ridicule. Pierce turned the check over in his hands, verifying the watermark by tilting it toward the overhead lighting. Satisfied, he handed it to the ring clerk, who recorded the details. The clerk gave a nod, confirming the authenticity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pierce announced, "this is entirely valid. Miss Shaw has provided a cashier's check that covers her bid in full. By all measures, we must honor her bid." With that, it was as though the breath of the entire audience exhaled in a single motion, some in relief, others in regret that they had not mustered the will to outbid her earlier. Drake shifted, looking momentarily like he might object again, yet no rule-breaking or cunning ploy remained for him to exploit. A hush fell once more. Pierce, returning to the podium, lifted the gavel. Everyone knew what came next, but the hush carried a sense of finality, an acknowledgement that something extraordinary had just unfolded before their eyes. $600,000. Pierce repeated, making sure no one intended a last-second bid. Going once, going twice, and sold. The sharp crack of the gavel's wooden head against the block rang out. A handful of hearts might have jumped in surprise. For a moment, no applause followed, just an awe-stricken silence. Then, in a gesture of respect or perhaps perplexed wonder, a few staggered onlookers clapped politely. It was subdued, uncertain, like they weren't sure if they should cheer or simply stand in reverent disbelief. "Iron Heart," Pierce declared, his voice echoing in the hush, "is officially sold to Miss Samantha Cole." Riley dipped her head in the faintest inclination, acknowledging the result. For an event that hinged so much on spectacle and applause, the concluding environment felt oddly solemn. One by one, the ring assistants moved in to handle Iron Heart, prepared to shift him backstage for final paperwork and transport instructions. A breathless hush lingered in the auction hall even after the booming echo of the gavel had subsided. People were still seated, as though glued to their chairs by the overhead lights remained steady, illuminating the polished floors and the ring where Iron Heart had been displayed, though the stallion had already been let out a side door to finalize the paperwork. His absence did not diminish the gravity of his sale. More than one or two whispers drifted through the air, picking up intensity with each repetition. "He just paid $600,000 for that horse. Where did she come from? Who is she?" From somewhere around the middle rows, a man's voice rose, clear enough to catch the attention of dozens. "Anyone have the faintest clue who this Samantha Cole is?" He spoke the name with a faint tinge of awe, as though he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or bewildered. Then a woman with salt and pepper hair and a rugged denim jacket slowly stood. Her expression was a cross between recognition and reluctant surprise. She cupped her hands around her mouth, trying to be discreet yet unable to contain the excitement in her voice. "Wait a minute," she said, and though her tone was not loud, it carried. Could she be the same Samantha Cole who used to train cavalry mounts for the military? I remember reading about a Samantha Cole who specialized in warhorse programs years ago. The question sparked immediate interest, as though flint had just struck stone. Heads turned in her direction, some wearing expressions of curiosity, others skepticism. A man next to her raised an eyebrow and murmured, "Military, that's a whole different level." But the seeds of recognition were sown. A soft murmur started rolling like a wave across the seat. It resonated with those who had any familiarity with equine programs for the armed forces. a middle-aged trainer sporting a scruffy beard and a plaid shirt with the top buttons undone, shot to his feet. His eyes shone with the excitement of someone uncovering a hidden piece of a puzzle. Samantha Cole from the old cavalry division. If I recall right, he said in amazement. Heck, there was once talk about her working with special units. A scattering of nods sparked in the audience. People who had lived and breathed horses their entire lives, especially those with a foot in the military or therapy sectors, began connecting dots they never thought they'd see come together in an auction hall. You could almost feel the energy shift as the name Samantha Cole took on a new meaning. She was no longer just a random woman in a faded military coat. She was a figure some had admired from afar, a woman rumored to have an uncanny bond with rebellious or traumatized animals. More voices joined. Didn't she once break a massive Mustang no one could handle? She was part of a program that used equine therapy for veterans. Right, I heard a story about her facing down a half-feral stallion, never so much as raised her voice, and within a week the horse was following her around like a lamb. Such tales were half legend, half fact, making them all the more compelling. The crowd grew visibly excited, as though they had collectively stumbled onto a celebrity in disguise. Even those who knew little about the specifics realized that the simple mention of Samantha Cole carried weight in equestrian circles that valued skill, compassion, and a touch of the extraordinary. No one seemed more disturbed by this unfolding revelation than Blake Mercer. Sitting in his seat, he looked every bit the picture of stiff fury, his posture rigid, and his jaw set so tight it might crack. Moments ago, he'd been humiliated by the final hammer stroke awarding Shadowfax to Samantha Cole, but now the humiliation deepened as he understood exactly who he had underestimated. Leaning toward a man who served as one of his ranch managers, Drake muttered through gritted teeth, "Samantha Cole. I remember that name. She was the one who ran the Crimson Point facility." The manager shot him a startled glance. "You mean the rehab center that refused your buyout offer a few years back?" Drake's dark eyes flicked around, ensuring no one else overheard. "Yes, that place had prime grazing land, and I tried to negotiate." A wave of chaotic emotions flickered across his face. First anger, then something akin to dismay at the realization that the same woman he had mocked was in fact a major figure in the equine world. He muttered more to himself than the manager. She was no outsider. She was once at the top, a living legend that for some reason vanished off the radar. Damn it. Pride kept him from saying more, but inside his mind churned. He recalled the biting remarks he'd directed at her, the casual assumptions that she belonged nowhere near this auction. Now it all backfired with a vengeance cutting at him from the inside. The crowd's shifting gaze, the excited hum that now carried Riley's name like a new anthem. He felt it all like a personal defeat. Those who had snickered at Riley earlier began rising from their seats. No longer were they searching for a better view of Shadowfax or the ring. They were craning to see her. Some stepped into the aisles,
mumbling phrases like, "I can't believe we didn't recognize her. It's been reclusive, though it's no wonder we forgot." Another woman in a flowing evening gown let out a small laugh of self-reproach, telling her husband we acted like she was some naive farmhand. In reality, she could run circles around half the so-called experts here. The change in the hall's atmosphere was tangible. Where they had once looked at Riley with suspicion or contempt, many now gazed with open respect or even awe. A group that had considered themselves the pinnacle of equine sophistication realized they might have been overshadowed by a figure whose achievements and expertise were far beyond mere money. In essence, the night's biggest revelation was not just the staggering bid, but the identity of the woman behind it. Still, for all the excited talk, Riley herself was nowhere in sight at the moment. Having concluded the final handshake for official paperwork, she had stepped aside to let the staff handle Shadowfax's arrangements. The mention of her name rippled outward, changing the narrative of the entire evening from "who does she think she is" to "she belonged here all along. We were too blind to see." While many of the evening's guests were left in the swirl of discussion and amazement, Blake Mercer refused to let the entire night end in quiet acceptance of his loss. The more he mulled over Riley's past acclaim, the more determined he became to wrest back some shred of dignity. So in a final bid for control, he pushed himself up from his seat. His chair screeched on the polished floor, drawing a few startled looks from those who thought the drama had ended. With a purposeful stride, he moved to where a small crowd had gathered near the archway leading to the main corridor. His voice rose, cutting through the ambient chatter. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Samantha Cole doesn't belong here. This is an auction for real breeders, not some ex-military show-off who thinks a big check makes her unstoppable." The hush that descended was sudden and tense. A few of the people standing there parted, revealing Riley on the other side. She had just emerged from the corridor leading to the back offices, presumably after signing the final purchase documents. Her expression showed mild curiosity, as though she had expected Drake might try one more time to confront her. She did not bristle or tense at his words, merely observed him with a level gaze. Colton took a few steps closer, the muscles in his neck visibly tight. "I don't care how many horses you've broken or how many war stories you've got. You do not belong in my world. You think you've proven something by buying that horse. You know nothing about real competitions or real industry dealings. This was never your place." Several onlookers grimaced at the desperation coloring his tone. Indeed, a scattering of nervous or awkward laughter bubbled up, some from those who still wanted to humor Drake's standing in the community, others from pure discomfort at his outburst. But it was a far cry from the easy guffaws that had accompanied him earlier. Riley remained silent, letting him rattle off his insults. She took a single step forward, enough to close the gap between them by a pace or two. Her voice, when it came, was low but steady, carrying an unmistakable note of finality. "Colton," she began, addressing him by name for the first time. "I was part of this world long before you ever set foot in it. Long before you figured out which spur went on which. Don't mistake my absence for ignorance." The crowd sucked in a collective breath. This was a more direct statement than Riley had offered before. She locked eyes with Drake, whose face colored in anger. She went on, each sentence enunciated with quiet clarity. "And I'll remain here long after people forget the name Blake Mercer." Her tone wasn't spiteful, merely matter-of-fact, like an instructor giving a final lesson to a student who refused to study. The hush that swallowed the hall was deeper than any prior silence. Even those who had initially ridiculed her recognized the weight behind her words. For a few beats, no one in the immediate circle moved or spoke. One person, apparently enthralled, started to clap but quickly stopped when they realized the moment was far too charged for casual applause. Colton's cheeks flushed a deep red. There were no retorts left in his arsenal. He had hurled his last shards of pride at Riley, only to see them brushed aside with unwavering composure. He glared at the small knot of onlookers, as if daring them to laugh at him. Most averted their gazes, unwilling to further provoke a man who looked about ready to explode. But they didn't step away from Riley either. The emotional gravity had shifted around her, and she stood by all accounts as the unshakable center. Blake Mercer, once the star, was now merely an echo. Slowly he exhaled, shoulders sagging. He glanced to one side where his ranch manager hovered, uncertain how to help. The manager gave a half shrug, no words of comfort forthcoming, with a final bitter glare at Riley. Drake turned on his heel. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his forehead as if he'd been engaged in a fierce physical contest. In a way he had, just not the kind he'd ever expected to lose. Without another word, Colton sank down onto the nearest chair. The look in his eyes suggested he felt more unmoored than he ever had, uncertain how to salvage his pride in front of so many witnesses. The crowd parted politely, some stepping away with anxious caution. Riley watched him for a breath longer, then gave a short, respectful nod, almost as if saying, "This ends here." She turned away, leaving him in the ring of silence that he'd fashioned for himself. The footfalls of the onlookers, the clearing of throats, and the awkward shifting of weight under expensive boots filled the vacuum. And Drake, for all his wealth and self-assuredness, had no weapon left to wield. With the last confrontation settled, the atmosphere in the auction center softened but never fully returned to normal. In place of the earlier arrogance lay a sense of humility that had swept through many attendees. They realized they had witnessed not just a large transaction, but a living lesson on values and how quickly appearances could mislead. Shortly after concluding the final paperwork, Riley made her way toward the side corridor that led to a loading bay. Shadowfax was waiting there, secured in a temporary stall, uneasy but calmer than during the auction. An attendant stood by with wide eyes, stepping back as Riley approached. The moment she took hold of the lead rope, Shadowfax responded, pressing forward slightly.
as if seeking her presence. She murmured something inaudible to him, a soothing hum that had no distinct words but carried a gentle cadence. The stallion let out a low exhale, lowering his head enough to bump gently against her shoulder. This was all the confirmation she needed. He acknowledged her as his rightful handler, no longer resisting or straining to flee. A hush of awe overcame the few bystanders who observed this quiet scene. It was as though Shadowfax's entire demeanor had shifted once he recognized his new owner. "We'll take him out the east door," she said quietly to the attendant. "My trailer's parked across from the main entrance near that tall saguaro cactus. Can we open the rolling gate on this side?" The attendant, still a bit starstruck, nodded. "Yes, ma'am, right this way." As Riley led Shadowfax down the wide corridor, the horse's hooves clacked softly on the polished floor. People passing by stepped aside, some bowing their heads in deference, or simply from caution around a stallion of his reputation. Gone were the mocking remarks or derisive glance. The hush that followed her was not one of contempt, but a kind of subdued. A few of those who had earlier ridiculed her presence now lowered their gazes, unwilling to meet her eye. Others risked a quick, appreciative nod. If she noticed, she gave no external sign. Her focus remained on Shadowfax, guiding him with a gentle hand on the lead rope. It was a moment so steeped in quiet respect that it felt almost sacred. Yet one final note of bitterness echoed from the far end of the corridor. Blake Mercer's voice, tinged with frustration, boomed faintly through the open partition. "You just got lucky, Shaw." That's all it was, luck. He never appeared in the corridor. The words arrived more as a last, desperate attempt to reclaim some fleeting sense of dominance. People flipped. Some who had begun to gather near the exit shook their heads in exasperation. But no one responded. For a second, Riley paused, her boots squeaking to a stop on the floor. Shadowfax tossed his head, pricking his ears at the reverberating shout. She did not walk back to confront Drake. Instead, she turned just enough so that her voice could carry. "I've been winning since before you even knew you were playing Drake." The tone was not loud, but its calm clarity sliced through the corridor. It served as a final boundary, a line that Drake could not cross. She turned away again, gently urging Shadowfax forward. And from that point on, there was only the soft click of hooves and the rhythmic shuffle of boots. No echoes of retort came from Drake. The moment was sealed in silence, and with it the last dregs of that night's confrontation slipped into memory. A faint sigh seemed to pass among the onlookers, though no thunderous applause erupted. The hush they maintained was as potent as any standing ovation. It was the hush of people who knew they had witnessed something both humbling and extraordinary. The transition from the buzzing lights of the auction center to the open expanse of the Arizona night felt like stepping into another world. The sky stretched above in an endless vault of stars, faintly illuminated by the gentle glow of a half-moon. Riley loaded Shadowfax into a trailer behind her well-worn pickup truck, each movement sure and unhurried despite the day's tensions. She drove through most of the night. The highway cut a ribbon of asphalt across the desert plains, flanked by towering cacti and jagged rock formation. The hum of the engine and the quiet weight of success and all it implied kept her company. In the rearview mirror, she occasionally glimpsed a restless Shadowfax, shifting in the trailer, but he never once whinnied in panic. Their bond, tenuous though it might be, had already rooted itself in mutual respect. As dawn broke, the horizon flared in hues of pink and gold. The colors spilled across outcrops of sandstone, and the temperature began its steady climb from the cool night air toward the arid warmth of a new day. Shaw Canyon Ranch, her inherited slice of desert land, lay nestled between two small mountain ridges, reachable by a winding dirt road that branched off from the main highway. The truck's tires crunched over gravel as Riley turned onto that familiar path. She exhaled deeply. Every yard closer to home felt like shedding the residue of the night's conflict. At the ranch house, a modest structure with a wraparound porch, James Walker stood waiting. He'd been awake for hours, unable to sleep once the local rumor mill and the online horse community exploded with news of Shadowfax's historic sale. Clad in work jeans and a t-shirt smeared with bits of hay, he paced by the gate, phone in hand, reading snippets of the story he couldn't quite believe. The moment he heard the growl of Riley's pickup, Ethan bolted down the porch steps. Crossing the dusty Riley, he burst out, voice trembling with excitement. "Holy, everyone's talking about you." The phone lines lit up when folks heard you outbid Blake Mercer at $600,000 for that stallion. "People, they're calling you a legend, asking if it's the same Samantha Cole who taught war horses." I told them I didn't know anything. She cut the engine and swung the door open, stepping onto the familiar dust of her ranch yard. Slow down, Ethan, she teased quietly, offering a faint reassuring smile. Yes, it's all true, and yes, it's Shadowfax. That black stallion everyone's been whispering about. Ethan's gaze darted to the trailer. He swallowed hard. I never doubted you had the know-how, but 600,000. Where did you? Sorry, I shouldn't pry. She gave a small shrug. It's money I'd set aside for a different purpose once, but now it felt right to invest it here. Let's just say I want to do something meaningful. Maybe bigger than I originally planned. He nodded, though his eyes still shimmered with amazement. All I know is you pulled off a miracle last night, and half the horse world is either in awe or in shock. Riley walked around to the trailer and lowered the ramp, stepping inside to unfasten the stallion. Shadowfax snorted, stamping once as if testing the ground. With a gentle tug, she guided him backward onto the dirt. He lifted his head high, nostrils flaring at the new scent, swirling in the early daylight. The ranch spread before them, a patchwork of scrub brush, cacti and sparse grasses rolling up to the base of towering red rock ridges. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, ears swiveling in all directions. Then, as though stirred by some internal call, Shadowfax broke into a fluid canter. He circled the yard in powerful strides, hooves kicking up small puffs of dust that caught the morning sun. The sight was breathtaking, an image of raw elegance and freedom. Ethan stood rooted, mouth agape. My God, he whispered. That's unbelievable. A glow of satisfaction passed over Riley's face. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about seeing this proud creature move as though discovering something he'd been deprived of. Genuine space to roam, to claim as his own. She unclipped the rope, letting him move freely. For a moment, Shadowfax simply gazed out across the grazing fields, as though deciding whether to run deeper into the rant. Ethan exhaled in awe. We're definitely in for a new era around here. Riley patted Shadowfax's flank. Yes, she murmured. Let's see if we can give him what he deserved, what so many others tried to force out of him. Shadowfax let out a resonant neigh, then bolted into a full gallop, streaking across the ranch grounds. The sunlight highlighted every contour of his sinewy frame, turning him into a gleaming icon of unshackled power. Watching him vanish behind the rolling hills, one might have likened him to a phantom of the desert wind, impossible to snare, amid the hush of morning in Shaw Canyon Ranch. The echoes of last night's auction already felt like a distant dream. Yet for those who had followed Riley's journey, the significance of what she'd done and what she symbolized remained fresh, a testament to her quiet strength and unwavering sense of purpose. Ethan eventually tore his gaze from Shadowfax's distant silhouette. A grin of pure excitement lit up his face. He turned to Riley, who still stood by the trailer, lost in her own thoughts. That scene, he breathed, watching him gallop over the sunrise. That's gotta be worth $500,000 on its own. You've given him real freedom. Riley's lips curved gently. He gave it to himself, she replied. All I did was open a gate. Ethan shook his head, eyes crinkling in admiration. Well, if you ask me, that's the best use of 600 grand I've seen in my life. And the buzz online. People are calling you a hero, you know, they're calling it a comeback story. A flicker of something deeper crossed Riley's face. Maybe regret, maybe relief. I don't need them to call me anything, she murmured, her gaze drifting out across the dusty road. I'm just glad I'm back where I belong. Instead of continuing the conversation, she turned toward the main barn, a simple structure with weathered planks that had seen better days. She took off her coat, revealing a plain t-shirt beneath, scarred in a few places from old fieldwork. Carefully, she hung the coat on a peg near the door. Then she let the water from a metal basin run over her hands, washing away the dust of the road, the lingering tension of the auction hall. I used to do this after every rough day, she said softly, as though explaining to Ethan, wash away the noise. He nodded, sensing that she didn't necessarily want to reply. The ranch still held its morning hush. No heavy machinery, no persistent phone call, just the rustle of a mild breeze through the brush. Inside the barn, a few older horses nickered in greeting, curious about the newcomer and the fresh energy coursing through the place. Riley stepped out, water dripping from her hands. She paused, scanning the horizon. Far in the distance, a faint cloud of dust indicated where Shadowfax roamed, exploring his new kingdom. It was an image that simultaneously grounded her and lifted her spirits. This land, this life, This was what she had fought for quietly all these years. There was no parade, no celebratory gathering to honor her big win. She neither needed nor wanted such fanfare. The ranch had always functioned on a simple rhythm: daily chores, caring for animals, maintaining fences, preparing feed. The sun climbed steadily overhead, and with it rose the routine of another day. Riley didn't resist it. She embraced it like a returning traveler might embrace home. Donning a spare hat resting on a hook, she moved through the barn aisles, checking each stall. Some of the older horses perked their ears, recalling her presence from long ago. Others were new rescues. She had always kept a place here for horses in need of rehabilitation or gentle training. With the addition of Shadowfax, the ranch's future glimmered with potential projects. Perhaps in time she would reshape the entire approach to how high-spirited horses were trained or integrated. Ethan followed in her wake, occasionally wanting to pepper her with questions about the night's confrontation or the deeper story of how she had financed that cashier's check. Yet each time he sensed her calm deflection, as though some chapters of her past were best left alone. He respected that boundary, knowing from experience that if Samantha Cole wanted to share more, she would do so in her own time. At last she stepped outside into the ranch yard, letting the sunlight wash over her face. Dust motes drifted lazily around, and the sky's brilliance had turned the air almost shimmering. Ethan lingered behind, giving her space. A single hawk circled overhead, screeching faintly before disappearing against the bright canvas of morning. Riley's mind wandered through the labyrinth of memories. Her earliest days in uniform, the bond she'd forged with horses that saw action in harsh conflict zones, the Crimson Point facility where she poured her soul into rehabilitating equines and humans alike. Then the betrayal, or the heartbreak that had driven her to leave it all behind. She had never spoken in detail. Instead, she had vanished into the American Southwest, living on the fringes until last night demanded her return to the public eye. Now, in the simplest, most unassuming manner, she recognized the fullness of her journey. She had walked into a world that wrote her off for how she dressed, and had emerged with the very prize that all their money and arrogance couldn't buy away from her. And it wasn't about the sum, it was about the statement. By reclaiming Shadowfax, she reclaimed her own voice in a domain that had tried to forget her. A faint call from across the field drifted to her ears. Ethan was waving, pointing toward the horizon. Shadowfax's dark shape was galloping along a fence line, a sleek arrow of black cutting through the golden haze. Something in that sight, the dynamic union of a restless spirit and open land, calmed her more than any applause or recognition could have.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. One or two onlookers sucked in a breath. This was no dust. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.